So I wanted to start today with just talking about some of the basics about awakening. I've covered this, or I touch on this regularly because it's really important to have the basic understanding of what is an awakening. What are we talking about? What does it consist of? How does it work? All that is useful reminders. So awakening is a cornerstone of Buddhism. In the two traditions that I teach, the Theravada and the Zen, the Theravada Buddhist path is really about a gradual path of purification. And part of that purification, there's sort of two routes we're taking there. One is that we're deconstructing the reality that we know of, what I call consensual reality or conditioned reality. And for most people, they hold conditioned reality as a truth, as something that's not changing, that has a permanency to it. And it isn't actually true. So part of the practices of Theravada, like the four elements practice of earth, water, fire, wind, we're doing a deconstruction of reality as we know it. So we're introducing impermanence, which is one of the ways that we relax our hold on the world being a fixed way of being. And the other aspect, the other development that we're doing in Theravada Buddhism is we're also deconstructing the self. So we're getting in touch with what we call no self or absence of self. And both of these break down our allegiance to the conditioned world as ultimate. And what happens is we start recognizing, making contact with the source of all creation and manifestation, what I call the absolute. And we make contact, in this group, we'll make contact regularly in all the meetings with the absolute. So we're cultivating that reality, which is an ultimate reality. The absolute is not conditioned, meaning it doesn't have a birth, a decay, or death. It's always been in existence. It always will be in existence. So we're touching into that part of ourselves that isn't subject to death or illness. So the Buddha taught both the Theravadan practices, and he also had a very deep awakening, which, as I mentioned, is a cornerstone of all of Buddhism. So the Zen tradition really focuses on the awakening itself. And in my opinion, the Zen tradition has done a really great job mapping awakening, the process of awakening, and has a lot of tools, a lot of practices and meditations that support cultivating both refining ourselves as people and also opening to the absolute in a way that at some point the spark of awakening could happen. So in my teaching, for me to confirm an awakening, a first awakening in the Zen tradition, is called kensho, which just means seeing true nature or seeing true nature as it is, something like that. There's three components I'm looking for. I'm looking for someone to have a very deep experience of absence of self, what traditionally is called no self in Buddhism. And normally if I would ask you, who are you, you would self-reference. You would turn in and you would start with, well, I'm this physical body, I'm this certain name, I'm this gender, I have all these markers of where I live, how I was educated, the work I do, etc. And so that would be the way that we would recognize who we are. And when we're deep in absence of self, none of those markers are available. We turn in and the authentic answer is, I have no idea who I am. I can't find a me to convey to you. So that's one component. The second component is a thoroughgoing unity experience. And that's a love experience. That's the absence of self is orienting to what I call the unmanifest functioning of the absolute, characterized by absence, by peace, and by stillness. Normally, if there's a visual component, it would be a very, very deep, intense black. The manifest, on the other hand, would be characterized with brightness. The closest color would be white, and that would be where the what I'm calling unborn, unconditioned love is functioning, and also the presence. So the here-ness, the immediacy, the now-ness of the absolute. And along with that is the perception of pure awareness. To me, pure awareness is awareness without conceptual reference. So normally when we meet someone or meet a new situation, we try to find a comparison to something in our history. And if we can compare it to say, oh, this person reminds me of Uncle Joe, then there's a way we shorthand. We can say, okay, I can relax a certain amount because I know who they're like. And we do this with all sorts of things. And this is just a shorthand. But when we're in touch with the unborn love, it's really a fabric of oneness, an undividedness. Sometimes it's called non-duality in Buddhism and other spiritual traditions, but it's not a splitting into two. So you and I can be distinct and independent, and yet we're also the same. We're functioning the same. So often I'll talk about the metaphor of ocean to waves. The waves are the individuals. The ocean is really what we are, the oneness, the undividedness. So those two components are important. The absence of self, no self, and the unity experience, the love experience, is also important to have too. And we have to be included in that love. It's not that I'm perceiving love everywhere except here. I'm perceiving love everywhere, including this location. So we have to those two components, and then there has to be a third component, which is the recognition, this is who I truly am. So this is my true identity. That's an important piece to it. So that would be the components necessary for a Kensho experience. In the Zen tradition, teachers will talk about the depth of awakening or the depth of Kensho. And that's really pointing to how long the experience stays. For most people, there's a deep experience of these components I've just mentioned. But at some point, the personality, while suspended in the process of Kensho, begins to reassert itself. So the individual who has had the Kensho experience is titrating between the qualities of Kensho and the personality. So it's back and forth. And how long the Kensho lasts, how long that those components are present in a significant way would determine how deep of an experience it is. For some people, I've had students who have had 1-minute Kenshos, which isn't going to be very life-changing, and others where it's lasted for weeks or months. So those would be very deep, because to have the personality tangentially present is quite impactful. To have it not be here all the time is deeply impactful. So about now, people start asking themselves the question, well, how come everybody isn't awake? If we have these components, it sounds pretty good to me. How come we can't just all have this experience? And really, it's our firm conviction in our self-identity as who we are at our core that keeps us from having these experiences. It's the beliefs about this is who I am. I'm this body, I'm this identity, I'm this history, I'm these emotions, all the ways that we recognize and mark ourselves. There's just a commitment to it. And conversely, there's a fear. If I'm not these things, if I'm not my job, if I'm not my gender, if I'm not my relationships, if I'm not all these things, then who am I going to be? And there's a fear that I'm going to get lost. I'm going to get lost within myself, which is some form of being insane or crazy. I'm not going to be able to hold a job. I'm not going to be able to maintain relationships. So ultimately, I'm going to be homeless and crazy. So that's the fear that people work with. If I let go of the sense of self, these are the risks I run. Interestingly, it happens for almost no one. that doesn't come to fruition. And yet people have to work through it. They've got to work through it, make enough contact, have enough contact with the Absolute to have some confidence, to begin to trust the Absolute, and to see that it's functioning in a way that's wholesome, in a way that will really help us live our life more fully rather than retreat from life. So one of the things I've noticed in working with students confirming Kensho is that when people are ripe for the Kensho experience, they typically have a very high level of trust. In Theravada Buddhism, there's teaching around doubt and trust. Doubt is the flip side of trust. So there's normally 3 areas where we can have doubt. We can have doubt in the teacher, doubt in the teaching, and doubt in ourselves. For most people, the strongest doubt is doubt in oneself. But you can have doubt. You could have doubt in me as a teacher or the teaching. So I recommend that people periodically throughout our day together just self-assess these levels to see your level of trust. Because what I've mentioned is the folks who have been ripe for Kensho, experienced Kensho, their trust levels were really high on all 3 of these categories. So I recommend using a 1 to 10 scale, 1 being low, 10 being high, and just assess, where are you, just authentically. You don't need to be at a certain level for my benefit, it's for your benefit just to see. And if the trust is low, try and look and see why. What about it is low? If you have doubt in me, if we haven't had much exposure to each other, then that trust is going to build over time. If you see me teaching in a way that makes sense to you, you feel a resonance with me, then that'll help build that trust. And the doubt in oneself, you have to have the contact with the Absolute, which helps buttress that insecurity to the point that you feel, oh yes, I'm a part of this. I'm a functioning part of the Absolute. So there are typically 2 portals to awakening. The most common portal, most common way in is through the absence, through the emptiness, through the peacefulness and stillness side, the quiet, the dark. That's where most people gravitate toward. Buddhism is really rooted in the absent side, in the unmanifest side of the Absolute. And religions like Christianity and Hinduism tend to gravitate more towards the manifest side, the love, the presence, the pure awareness, the brightness. So that's the other portal, is through the love, through the unity side. But again, all 3 components have to be present. So whether one enters through the absence or through the presence doesn't matter, but all of these have to be sparked. Otherwise, if one just had an experience of the love and presence, that would be a unity experience. If one had an experience of the absence, the peacefulness and stillness, that would be a no-self experience. But you need the combination and the recognition for it to be confirmed to Kensho, at least in this lineage. So one of the things we do, one of the practices we do, which help cultivate our contact with the Absolute, is a practice I call innate goodness. And this is a practice that I've slightly innovated from the traditional metta practice. What's metta is usually translated as loving kindness. I prefer the unborn or unconditioned love as a translation. But this innate goodness practice is touching into a quality of the Absolute, which is goodness. And I use the term innate simply to mean it's unconditioned, it's always here. Any quality or aspect of the Absolute is always present because it isn't conditioned. It has no birth or death, so it's always present. So what we're keying into, what we're touching into, is a goodness that's already present. We can recognize this goodness often in seeing babies, whether animal or human. They can have a goodness to them that isn't dependent on behavior. They're not trying to impress us, or they're not trying to get us to like them. They're simply being, and that being resonates with a goodness. For others, nature itself really conveys this goodness. So we'll do a practice now, innate goodness practice. Just want to say one last thing about it, that some of the benefits of innate goodness practice is it does put us in touch with an unconditioned quality of the absolute. It also fills in with goodness that area in us that we feel a deficiency, we feel a less than, a sense of being worthless or valueless in some way. So it counteracts that assumption we carry. And part of that identity of being valueless or worthless is really supported by our negative self-talk and negative self-judgments. So the function of the superego, the inner critic, criticizing you when you take action that it deems to be a mistake. So the innate goodness helps soften the superego. It helps fill in the sense of lack of value. And it puts us in contact with the quality of the absolute, which is all to the good. So the way we practice this is I'll guide you through a meditation and make contact in the heart area, and we'll open to qualities of innate goodness together. So go ahead and settle yourself into your meditation posture. Start with some centering and relaxing belly breaths. Really fill your lungs and abdomen all the way down to genitals with air, and then release as much of that air as is possible. Letting go of any mentalizing that's taking you away from this moment. Just let yourself fully land in this breath. Feel your contact with the floor, the support and holding of the building you're in. Notice if you can sense our Mother Earth beneath, holding each of us. Offering us nourishment, food, housing, clothing, all the way down to this very breath. This breath is keeping us alive. It's a gift from Mother Earth. And let's include in our practice today the people in your life who you deeply care about. And let's include the people who you love. And this is true throughout your life, not just in this moment, but people you've cared about in your lifetime, people you've loved in your lifetime. And let's include the people who care about you and who have cared about you. And let's welcome the people who love you and those who have loved you. We're practicing for all these people today in addition to ourselves. So bring your awareness to the belly, specifically to a chakra in the chakra systems of the yogic tradition called the hara in the Zen tradition. It's about 2 finger widths below the navel and 2 or 3 finger widths in from the surface of the skin. It's a natural grounding spot, a natural seat in consciousness. Breathe into the hara if possible, letting yourself fully take this important seat. We don't need to suppress thoughts or experiences. Just let them float across the sky like a white cloud on a sunny day. On the next in-breath, invite awareness into the heart area. And by that I mean the chest cavity itself. Or opening to the innate goodness that's already here. If you're a visual meditator, you may be perceiving the innate goodness as a brightness, what appears to be a whiteness. That quality of purity is something that purifies us. It lets us challenge the beliefs that we're not good enough, that we're not enough, that somehow we're broken. The purity purifies those untruths. And the goodness has a kind of buoyancy to it, an effervescent lightness. We feel uplifted when we make contact with innate goodness. Innate goodness also has a quality of love, an unconditioned love that is not dependent. You don't need to be a certain way. You don't need to perform a certain way. No matter how you are, you're always loved. The Absolute is simply loving itself. You may be feeling this love and lightness and purity as a kind of buoyancy, kind of hopeful optimism. Everything is going to work out exactly as it should. You may be feeling the love, the innate goodness, like a white fluffy cloud, soft, supportive, holding you tenderly. As you make contact with innate goodness, just relax into it. Relax any doing and just let yourself be directly with innate goodness. We'll sit silently together for about 10 minutes, and then I'll ring the bell.